My special guest tonight is Sulaiman Ahmed. He is an investigative journalist, and he is actually the one responsible for a lot of the video footage that you are seeing coming out of Gaza on Twitter. Sulaiman, thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate you having me on. Yeah, thank you for having me. In terms of me being responsible, I'm probably responsible for proliferating it on the internet. But in terms of being the source, obviously, I'm not in Gaza. That's the people who are doing the real life journalist work in Gaza, risking their lives. And we already seen 97 of them have already been murdered, and a lot of them have been targeted. Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that. I don't want to take credit for something that wasn't me.
So one of the things I noticed in a lot of like your posts, one of the things that you continue to say is that they are killing children. Yeah. I want to talk about why you believe that the state of Israel is targeting so many children. And then I also want to go into some of these facilities that they've attacked as well, the hospitals, the schools. I heard about a woman recently that was killed at a church. But let's start with the children. In your opinion, why do you believe that they are targeting so many kids in Gaza?
So first of all, they've already killed 7,700 children. So that's almost 40% of the people that have been killed. Now, children do make up a large proportion of the Gazan people. And the reason for that is because they've been continuously bombing Gaza. They've been continuously, and this isn't a new thing from October the 7th. They've always bombed and killed people from Gaza. And so this is what they've done is called in terms of population trimming. Now, what's the reason for why they're targeting children is because children are the future. And I don't think it's specifically like just a direct attack on children. I think it's just indiscriminate killing of everybody. But what's happening is when you're doing that indiscriminate killing and you know that you're bombing, and where you're bombing, you know that the vast majority of the people within there, or 40%, are going to be children. Essentially, you are targeting children. Now, why I think it's really important is because at the beginning, Israel made a lot of claims. They claimed that a lot of Israeli children had been killed. A lot of Israeli babies had been killed. And we found out that that wasn't true. They claimed that there were 40 beheaded babies. That ended up being fake news. They claimed baked babies. That ended up being fake news. They claimed that there'd been babies that had been incinerated, and that had been fake news. And now we find out, according to Haaretz, which has the figures on it, which is the latest figures is 1,078, I believe, that of those babies, only one baby was killed, and that was in Kibbutz Be'eri. And according to first-hand witness testimony, that was actually killed by Israeli forces themselves. So what that means is no babies were actually killed by Hamas. And that's important because what it then highlights is, look, those guys didn't kill any babies. And actually, these guys have already killed 7,700 children, a large proportion of them being babies.
That's right. That's right. I want to get into the hospital, some of these facilities. So obviously, I would say if Russia were to target a hospital in Ukraine, I think the United States government would have no problem calling that a war crime. There wouldn't have to be masses of protest across the globe for Joe Biden or the Biden administration to just openly call it out for what it is. But for some reason, when it's the state of Israel attacking hospitals, they seem to be a little bit hesitant. And it wasn't until after the masses of protests and more of that footage coming out from Gaza, then they started to say they have to follow the laws of war, but they're still not following those laws. I saw a video recently the other day where there was a journalist reporting live on the ground, and there was a hospital that was bombed right behind him. And he said, oh my gosh, that's another hospital. And I believe that the reason why they're attacking the hospitals is to prevent the doctors from actually saving the people who are injured, who can be saved. But I want to hear your take about that, about them attacking these hospitals.
Yeah, so I agree. That's the reasoning, as well as terrorizing the populace, because if you leave them in a constant state of fear, what will they do? They'll try and get away from the situation that causes fear. And in reality, what they want to do is get them to remove themselves from Gaza, to ethnically cleanse it. And we can talk a little bit more about that later on in the show, if you please, if you wish. But in terms of what you said specifically, look, today it came out in the Washington Post that Al-Shifa Hospital did not have a tunnel network connected to it. as did not the 5 other hospitals. And this is by mainstream media. And I have my issues with mainstream media, but this is even the mainstream media are stating the same thing. And I had Dr. Mads Gilbert on my show, who has worked in Al-Shifa Hospital over a period of 16 years. And he said that there was no-go areas in Al-Shifa Hospital. And so he could go wherever he pleased. And he never would have worked there if there was a no-go area in Al-Shifa Hospital. And so, and he also explained quite in depth about the specific attacks on hospital, and something you've said as well, that they've actually attacked more than 20 out of the 28 hospitals have been left non-operational, with the rest of them being almost at its knees in terms of operational. And so it comes to the point of, what are they trying to do? First of all, they're trying to terrorize them, to leave them in a state of fear, to, as you said, continue killing the populace because they want to reduce the populace as well, because they know what they've done. They know that when they're killing these people, there is going to be some form of a reaction or possible reaction in the future. And so rather than have that, they're just murdering them. And the second reason is, when you terrorize a populace, generally speaking, the populace will try and remove themselves from the situation. Remember, these are largely children and women. So they're going to remove themselves from the populace and remove themselves from the area, because the real plan of Israel, as explained by Netanyahu today, is to take control of the whole of Gaza. And so today there was a report again that came out. I believe it was the New York Times, though I could be wrong. It could be the Washington Post again, where Netanyahu has said that he wants to take control of the whole of Gaza. He doesn't want the Palestinian Authority to have control of it. And even though President Joe Biden from the United States has said that he doesn't agree with this, he's going to go ahead with it. And as you know, there's been Israeli intelligence leaked documents. There's been WikiLeaks documents. There's also been Joe Biden's budget on page 60, which talks about the displacement of these people from Gaza. So the real plan is to take control of the land as well, and to keep control of the entire region. And what's interesting is they kept on claiming that what Palestine wanted to do was to take control of it from the river to the sea. And they claimed that that was genocide, when all that meant was from the river to the sea, Palestinians will be free. It's a call of freedom. But what they're actually enacting is the actual Likud Charter, which is the entire control of the entire land and the genocide of the entire populace.
How long before you think that more countries of the West, so for example, Germany and the UK recently called for a ceasefire, but that was after it was revealed that the IDF killed 3 Israeli hostages that were waving a white flag, which I've also heard is not uncommon for the IDF to do, to actually target individuals that have a white flag. They don't care. I think they just want to shoot whatever is moving, right? But how long do you think it will be before other countries that are a part of the West try to, in some way, shape, or form, use their power, so to speak, to actually push back against the state of Israel to end this war?
So in terms of the, waving the white flag, that was a prime example of how Israel indiscriminately kills anyone, irrespective of who they were. So these people didn't really look like they were even Palestinians, but it was like, for example, either the Hannibal Directive, or they thought they were Palestinian civilians, but they basically took them out. And why the Hannibal Directive is important is basically a directive where they're able to kill their own civilians in order to basically not have issues later, whether it's a hostage negotiation or other issues. And we'll talk a little bit, if we can, about October the 7th in a bit, but what happened on October the 7th is another example of the Hannibal Directive in force. And there's, again, a significant amount of literature, both from the Times of Israel, Haaretz, Maimonides, and many other Israeli publications that have basically revealed what actually happened on October the 7th. But in terms of your question, in terms of the Western countries, look, I believe that none of them will actually do anything in reality, because what at the moment they've got the United States of America shielding them from any kind of tough decision, and so therefore they can just verbally make statements that really won't have real life impact in terms of anything causing a real life ceasefire. What you've basically got is a few Western leaders, right, who are basically supporting the Israeli cause. Now, the question of why they're doing it is a separate question, and that would require a show on itself in terms of details of why there is this level of control of these few Western nations by Israel. Because in reality, and even in those Western nations, you see the protests in the United Kingdom, 1.2 million people attended one of the weeks, and we have 500,000, 300,000 people attending every week. Not just in the United States. You look at New York, you look at Paris, where it's all illegal to protest, and many other countries. The people are actually against what's happening in terms of the genocide, but there's just a few leaders whom are basically beholden to the Israeli state who are basically supporting this. So yeah, I don't see a change in policy until Israel decides to do so.
I want you to hear something that Larry Johnson said here recently. And for people watching, not Larry Johnson, the basketball player, because I think I mentioned that one time before. Different Larry Johnson. Larry Johnson highlights Israel's goal. So he said this recently on Press TV. Larry Johnson, former CIA analyst. Everyone listen to this.
Their goal is to depopulate Gaza of Palestinians and get them out of the West Bank too. That's why they're out there arresting it. This notion that, oh, we're going to defeat Hamas, that's our goal, you know, that's nonsense. It's a lie. That's not their goal. Are they trying to rescue hostages? No, they're not. That's why they killed 3 of them yesterday. Rescuing hostages is not a priority. Depopulating Gaza, exterminating Palestinians from Gaza, whether they're Muslim or Christian or whatever, get them out, because the Israelis want that land. The Israelis want to take it for themselves, and the same applies to the West Bank. So, you know, people need to stop indulging this nonsense that Israel actually has some defined military objectives. They do not. It is they are accomplishing what they set out to do as far as forcing the civilian population out. But the Hamas fighters they are fighting back, and they are, as I think was noted earlier in your report, causing greater casualties than Israel is admitting to.
Okay, this piece here from Larry Johnson, where he says what I think a lot of us have been assuming for a long time, even before October 7th, that the goal is to push the Palestinian people off of the land. He mentioned the West Bank. I want to pivot to that for just a second, and then we'll come back to October 7th. The illegal settlements that have been happening in the West Bank, the UN says it's illegal. Other politicians say it's illegal. But no one is preventing Israel from continuing to kick Palestinians out of their home in the West Bank. No one is telling them that they have to get rid of those settlements and they have to give those people back their homes. No one's telling them people are still being, you know, ravishly just pushed out. I've seen videos of this. And to me, it's one thing for the UN to acknowledge it, which I feel like they do very well. They're really good at acknowledging that something is happening. But I feel like it stops there. They released another statement today saying that the IDF actually killed 11 unarmed Palestinian men in front of their family members. Again, great to acknowledge it. But it seems like after that, there's no action that takes place to prevent the state of Israel, particularly Netanyahu, from allowing these crimes to continue. What do you think is going to happen in the West Bank moving forward? My prediction is that once they finish with Gaza, then they're going to do the same thing in the West Bank. And the next thing you know, they'll have the entire area to their self. But I would hope that there would be some type of intervention before that to prevent that from happening. But I feel like the West Bank that's one area that I feel some people are just not really focusing on because of what is happening in Gaza.
Well, I first of all agree with your assessment completely, and that's actually my thought as well. The plan is to take over the whole land, which has been stated in the Likud Charter, which is that they want the whole area. Now, in terms of what you said, 100%, it is illegal internationally what they're doing in terms of the West Bank, creating the settlements, and illegally taking the homes of the Palestinian people. And you're seeing that. And the level of abuse that's happening in the West Bank has been horrific. And remember, Hamas aren't in control of the West Bank. And what you're seeing is since October the 7th, the number of people that they've detained, the last time I checked, and I checked a couple of weeks ago, was at least 900 people. So the number is going to be in the thousands by now. The number of people that they've actually detained and taken hostage. And the reason I call it hostage is because when they take these people, they don't give them a trial the vast majority of the time. And when they do, they put them through a fake military court where the conviction rate is 99.3%. Only one conviction was ever not, it was only one situation when a conviction didn't happen. So the people in the West Bank are terrorized. They are treated as second-class citizens. And then when they're taken as hostages, you see the level of negativity they have. So recently, when we had the hostage exchange, where the Israeli hostages were exchanging the Palestinian hostages, when the hostages came out, without even one person disagreeing, they all talked about the horrific nature by which Israel had treated them in prisons. They had been beaten, they had been abused, they had been assaulted, they had been sexually assaulted, they'd been raped. And when they all came back, I posted the videos, all of them thanked Hamas. So even if they didn't have affinity for Hamas before, the fact that they were the reason that they were released from the hostage situation, now you've created some situation where they're seeing some kind of affinity. And it wasn't just her. For example, Ahad Tamimi, who's in the West Bank, who is a well-known activist who became famous as a child because of her activism, was taken just 3 weeks ago, again taken hostage. And they made a fake Instagram post. And when it was exposed that Instagram wasn't hers, they then basically kept her without ever holding her, without ever charging her. And then she was part of the hostage negotiation. And when she came back, you should have seen her face. She looked like she'd been abused badly, right? Someone who looked extremely strong. And she said that, look, I'm still going to speak out, even though they said that they're going to harm my father, who's also in detention right now. And they threatened me with it. So this is the level of abuse they're putting the people through, because there's, again, they're terrorizing the populace. And I agree with you. In reality, the aim is to ethnically cleanse the entire region and to basically take over it. And something important you said, this isn't a Muslim issue. They're also terrorizing anyone who's Palestinian. Christians is a prime example you mentioned. The Christian population, due to Israeli extermination, is decreasing significantly. It's now down to 800, I believe. And there was many first-hand testimonies talking about how these people are being exterminated. The Christian church, even in Gaza, has spoken continuously and unequivocally about the level of terrorism that's occurring by the Israeli regime. And you just saw recently, not only they first of all killed Justin Amish, his family, who is a senator in the United States, but just very recently they just murdered 2 women who were part of a Christian parish. So this is a targeted attack against both Muslims and Christians, and also Orthodox Jews, because they actually terrorize them in Israel as well. So this isn't a religious thing. This is a ideology that wants to take control over the entire land.
And that brings me to this question that continues to rise and has been mentioned multiple times before. This idea of a 2-state solution. My question is, how can there be a 2-state solution with all of the settlements that exist in the West Bank?
It's a very good question. And we're almost in a window into why a 2-state solution wouldn't work, because in reality, a 2-state solution would be Israel oppressing the other state, whatever you may call it. Now, in reality, they don't want a 2-state solution because, for example, the Israeli the Israeli ambassador, as well as the Israeli foreign minister, said, we don't want a 2-state solution. We don't want 1-state solution. So if they don't want a 2-state solution and they don't want a 1-state solution, in reality, the solution they want is the entire area. Now, my point is this. They claim that they're a democracy. They claim that they're a Western democracy. You know what Western democracy speaks about? Equal values. No man has more rights than another man. No woman has rights than another woman. All are equal under the state. It doesn't matter what your race is. It doesn't matter what your religion is. It doesn't matter what your ethnicity is. Everyone is equal. So if you believe in that, why not have a 1-state solution? Have all man that is equal in that state, irrespective of what your background is. Now, the reason they won't want that is because the ideology of that state is based on supremacy.
That's right. That's right. Now, I want to move into October 7th, because the story has changed so many different times. Let's start there. Let's start with the breakout when they broke free through the gates. And could you explain to people what you have gathered, what you understand about what took place on October 7th, because like I said, the narrative has been changed so many different times.
It's such an important question that you're asking, because not many people are willing to talk about it, because I mean, it's been dramatized to such an extent that even talking about it, people are almost calling you a denialist. But it's not about denial. And by the way, I'm not a supporter of Hamas. Like, I don't have any affinity to Hamas whatsoever. But what I do have is journalistic skills and an intellectual brain to be able to analyze the situation. And like, what I've seen is this. And what's clear, and this is just based on Hamas's statements, this is based on Israeli statements, this is based on newspaper articles. Hamas went in. And the reason they went in is because they wanted to go to the kibbutzes, because the kibbutzes have actual military personnel who basically stay in there and are stationed there. And they wanted to go into the kibbutz, take hostages and take them back, and then do a hostage negotiation for their own hostages that are kept in Israeli prisons. Thousands upon thousands of them, not vast majority, but a large number of them being children, and actually the vast majority children and women, but a large number of them children. So that was the actual objective. But then what happened was, obviously things went wrong. One of the things that went wrong is the music festival. The music festival was only meant to be one day. They made an application, the music festival, just 2 days before to extend it by 2 days. So the music festival was never meant to be there. That was a surprise. So you see, for example, there's a video where a Hamas member says, "Where are the soldiers?" They were surprised. That's the first thing that caused confusion. The second thing was that you saw a scenario where the Israeli army themselves either mass scale applied the Hannibal directive, which is to kill indiscriminately and to take Hamas out, or they lost their minds and they start shooting. So we have, for example, first-hand witness testimony from example Yasmin Pora, who talks about how Israelis were shooting at them, not Hamas. Now, when you look at what actually happened, it's quite clear. Based on the evidence of the Apache helicopters, there was just footage released the other day of Kibbutz Be'eri being shot with short artillery fire and burnt up. There's a testimony in the Times of Israel by someone from the Israeli army saying that we killed 80 people in Kibbutz Be'eri. One of them was a child. So remember when I said that only one child was killed? One baby was killed. Sorry, not child. One baby was killed. That was the one baby that was killed in Kibbutz Be'eri by Israeli forces. So they killed at least 80 people in Kibbutz Be'eri. So there's about 1,000 people who died, of which 695 were civilians. And that number is decreasing each time. But at the moment, let's take that number. And what happened was there was a shooting, and Israel definitely killed its own people. Now, how many they killed, we don't know. We know Hamas would have killed people for sure as well. And some of them people would have been killed when Hamas was shooting and Israel was shooting, and they were shooting at each other. Now, in terms of the video evidence, I've been through it. The video evidence on the GoPros does definitely, and we have to be honest, like it does definitely show 2 to 3 possible incidences of intentional killing of people by Hamas. So I'm not saying it didn't happen at all, but there's definitely 2 or 3. One of them is there's a guy, they have a scuffle and the guy gets away. So you could make the argument that, look, there was a scuffle and he got away. The one does look like intentional killing. And the third one I've just heard about in terms of the video, which is that a short bomb was thrown at a guy. So those are the 3 that possibly are intentional killing. The rest are either unintentional killing, or, and by the way, that 3 you can maybe extrapolate, and maybe it's a bit more larger number. But in terms of actual killing, intentional, it's a very small number. The rest of it is unintentional killing, either by Hamas, largely by Israeli forces when they were shooting at each other. And so that's the reality of what happened. And if you look at the videos that they're sending, so for example, they go into movie theaters and playing these videos, not showing the populace because we can debunk it. And 80% of them videos we actually have access to. They are actually, some of them incidents are actually incidents from other wars. For example, there's an image of a Ukrainian woman on the floor with her underwear out. That's a Kosovan woman from a previous war. There's a video of, have you heard of when they're talking about someone was cut open and the insides were taken out? You must have heard of this. That was actually from a cartel video, not from what happened on October the 7th.
So you're saying, so like, for example, Chris Cuomo is one of those people recently. He has actually said to people that he saw the documentary that happened on October 7th, or the footage that was put together, and he said it was really horrific or whatever. You're saying that those screenings that they're having, which you're right, they're not public, but those screenings that they're having, some of the video footage is actually from other countries.
That's correct. Yeah, it is. And this is and by the way, the vast majority of that, 80%. So according to Owen Jones, who's seen it, he says at least 80% of that is actually out in the public anyway. So there's only 20% of content that is new. So that 20% we've not seen. I have an issue where they're not showing it. What's the reason? So I had a debate with Israel, people from Israel, even the foreign ministry and so on and so forth. And they said that we don't want to show it because of people like you. But what about people like me? Like, I'm going to debunk it. So they're showing it in movie theaters through Gal Gadot and various others. So it's not because they want to respect the dead, or they're showing it in foreign ministries. So the real reason they're not showing that extra 20% is because they'll be debunked like the rest of them. That's the real reason they're not showing it. And you know, another point is I just wanted to make about this fake idea of mass rape. That is again another example of fake propaganda that occurred, because they want you to believe that they were GoPros and video was there, but for some reason when the rape occurred, there was no video evidence. They also want you to believe that these people were so barbaric that they raped, but then when they went back and they took these people hostages, now they didn't rape them, because none of the hostages that have been released have even claimed that they were raped. Actually, the vast majority have been saying that they've been treated well. There was even a TikTok video of the 13-year-old children who were basically saying it was like a vacation. And in addition to that, some of the accounts about the rape have been debunked already. For example, there was a guy called Nico Ostroga who basically claimed that 29 of his people had been murdered, and that ended up being fake news because he was a settler and he was just making propaganda. There was a guy called Yoni Sardan. Yoni Sardan made the story about Hamas raping 10 people, and one of the women's 10 Hamas people raping a woman, and her face was like an angel. And Yoni Sardan came out and said, I wasn't even there.
I saw that one.
Yeah, you saw that one. So this is the example of like a lot of the propaganda and the rape claims. And again, I had this debate. All of them are basically, none of them are first-hand testimony. None of them is based on medical evidence. None of them based on any kind of physical evidence. It's all based on second-hand testimony. Someone claiming that they saw. And largely, a lot of these people that we've looked into are either linked to Israel, Israeli intelligence, or settlers.
Another question I was going to ask as well, even when they came out with the propaganda about the beheaded babies, I was under the impression, please correct me if I'm wrong, but I was under the impression that that is actually against like their culture to harm children.
100%. So look, when it comes to Hamas, if they follow Islamic rules, it's totally against the religion of Islam to harm any civilian, irrespective of even if it's a child, a man or a woman. No one should be harmed. And also taking hostages. I said this at the beginning. This is where I disavow what Hamas did in terms of taking babies hostage or taking children hostage. It's against the tenets of the religion. Now the question becomes, because I've been thinking about this a lot, and again, this is not my position, it's just something I've been thinking about, a thought process, that actually, if they'd left them children in these kibbutzes, there's a high chance that they would have been killed by this, by the Apache helicopters, by the short artillery fire. You should see the kibbutzes, they've been burnt to the ground by Israeli forces. And so the question becomes, should you take a child who will likely get killed to basically give it less of a chance to be killed? So that's just something that I disagree with what they did, but then maybe that could have been a possibility of what they were thinking. But I just want to be as fair as possible. Where they've done wrong, I will say, and where they've not, where it seems like they've not done wrong, I have to speak about it, and I think that's the right thing to do.
What do you think? Because when I listen to a lot of what has happened since October 7th, it's really interesting to me that the Zionist narrative seems to be, let's start with that date. Yeah. And anytime you want to mention anything about the occupation, the previous caloric diet, the oppression, the dirty water, the fact that Israel controls the resources and that the Palestinians are actually just caged in like cattle in Gaza, anything about the illegal settlements in the West Bank, I noticed they start to get very flustered. I saw several interviews on Rising where this would happen the moment you mentioned, well, what about what happened before October 7th? And the reality is, at least to me, had there not been the occupation, had there not been the oppression, had there not been this forceful removing of people, Palestinian people, from their homes, we wouldn't have had an October 7th. But I feel like the Zionist narrative does not want to talk about that.
I completely agree with you. And before we found out the reality of what happened on October the 7th, let's say it was as bad as they lied about, right? Then the question became exactly what you said, that if you look at the way they were treated, they were kept in a concentration camp, essentially. They were kept as a slave race. And the real question becomes, look, if you're a slave, if you've been kept in captivity in your house and you're finally freed, you're finally let out, and you're in front of your captor, who has been treating you like this, has been abusing you, has taken food away from you, taken water away from you, killed you on a regular basis, killed your mother and children on a regular basis, and you're finally in front of your captive, and you're having the ability to, do something about it. We live in the West, so we can't understand that psychology because we've never experienced it. I've lived a very privileged life in terms of being in the West. One of the best countries. I'm from the United Kingdom. It is one of the best countries in the world in terms of giving us this, freedoms and access and so on and so forth. But in terms of, imagine you're living in that life. What would your mindset be? What would your thought be? What would you do to get out of captivity? And so in reality, even as you said, what happened before October the 7th is more important, not equally important, is more important, because this is the manner in which they're being treated. And yet, despite being treated like that, it looks like October the 7th was nothing like what they claimed. It looks like it was a military objective to go to the kibbutz, to get hostages, to get their own hostages released, the hostages who have actually been treated horribly in Israeli dungeons.
How do you feel about this report that came from the New York Times that the Israeli intelligence actually knew a year prior to October 7th that Hamas was planning this attack and chose not to do anything about it because I guess they didn't really take it seriously or thought there's no way they would be able to do this? How do you feel about that? Because I kind of feel as though if I were to see something like that, and I know these are people that we were occupying and we were oppressing, I would not choose to ignore it unless I wanted it to happen.
So I have seen that report and I'm a bit dubious about it. And I'll explain why. Because when you look at the events of what happened on October the 7th, it does demonstrate extreme panic from the Israeli forces side. And so the actions do not demonstrate a people that thought this was going to happen. Now, it is possible that, for example, there was intelligence and maybe Netanyahu had it and then they didn't want to pass it along. But I because it's come from the mainstream media, and we know, when it comes to mainstream media, they do propagate propaganda. I'm a bit dubious about it. I feel like this is being used in order as a mechanism to later use against Netanyahu to make him the fall guy, or to use it against somebody to take them out. I don't actually believe that they actually really knew about it or there was real intelligence. I believe this is like fake propaganda, basically fed to the mainstream media through the deep state. Now, this is my opinion. My opinion could be wrong, but I'm not convinced by this idea that they knew 1 year before.
That's an interesting point. I want to ask you a question about some of the other Arab countries, the surrounding Arab countries. Israel is also bombing Lebanon and Syria. Last time I checked, Hamas isn't in Lebanon and Syria. And then you also have the situation with the Houthi rebels from Yemen that intervened in the Red Sea and said, no, you're not going to send these weapons to Israel. We're going to make this very difficult for you. The Biden administration actually called on other countries to join them in this effort to, I guess, possibly start a war with Yemen, as if Yemen needs any more catastrophe, any more disaster done to their country at this point in time. And what was really interesting is that Saudi Arabia said no. And I say that's interesting because the United States government gave weapons to Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia used those weapons on the people in Yemen. We also said at that point in time that that was considered to be, quote unquote, a genocide as well that was happening to the people in Yemen. But this time around, Saudi Arabia has turned their back on the United States. And I want to get your take about that. And do you think that any other countries such as like Jordan or Egypt may intervene here as well?
Yeah, it's a good question. And again, I don't think that Saudi Arabia going against them is something that is, again, legitimate. I just think it's something that was used as a propaganda piece, because in reality, if Saudi Arabia wanted to do something about it. They have the mechanism, they have the international relations with the United States to ensure that that it doesn't happen. Now, in terms of Saudi themselves, they actually, as you said, they've been oppressing the people from Yemen for a significant period of time. So I again don't think that this is a legitimate situation where they've basically decided that they're not going to be part of it. Now, in terms of the Yemeni Houthi, as you said, they've done done a very impactful job, because they've basically cut off the trade routes. It's going to cause financial impact both in the United States, in the West, in the United Kingdom, and so on and so forth. So in terms of what they've done what they've done has been impactful. In terms of people turning their back on Israel, I don't think so. For example, I do think even when Erdogan speaks out, I think it's really just it's not something that's legitimate. He's doing it to basically garner favoritism within his nation who have affinity towards the Palestinian people. But if you look at it from an actual political perspective, he's not made any moves whatsoever that can even harm the Israeli economy. He continues to provide them with oil and so on and so forth. So I think some of these leaders are just basically saying it to save face, or because what happens in a lot of these countries, Arab countries, as he said, is the people actually are with Palestine, even if the leadership aren't. And so even though someone like the leadership of Saudi won't care as much about his people in terms of what their view is, but in reality, there is this situation where they're trying to play the PR game a lot more. If it was something really impactful, then I don't believe Saudi would actually do anything that's really impactful that goes against the interests of the United States.
And I want to get your take about Russia and China, because they also have spoken out in reference to this war. Vladimir Putin actually recently just had a trip to the Middle East, where he also met with the Prince of Saudi Arabia. And there are talks there in reference to what to do about Israel and Gaza. I'm curious, where do you think Russia and China would land on this particular issue?
So Russia is interesting, because they've kind of got like a dual interest or a dual purpose in this. So on the one hand, they're for the pro-Palestinian position. And the reason for that, again, is because it's kind of against the West American position, because the Americans are pro-Israel. And so Putin does fall under the pro-Palestinian position in that regard. And so if you look at a lot of his comments and a lot of his statements, they have been all about giving Palestinians their rights, providing them with a solution. I had the Russian foreign minister on, and he basically said the same thing, that look, and something you mentioned earlier as well, that if Russia had done anything like this, there would have been uproar throughout the world. If Russia had attacked buildings, if Russia had attacked civilians, there would have been an uproar throughout the world. If Russia had bombed in the same manner, there would have been also. And actually, he claimed that Russia were the only ones who are basically attempting to cause some kind of ceasefire in the United Nations. So that's definitely the position in terms of from that perspective. But when I said dual purpose, what I mean is not in like 50-50, but what I mean is obviously Russia does have relations with Israel as well. There is significant, again, trade relations and so on and so forth. So they won't want to harm them as well. So there is these extra aspects that to consider. So I don't think, again, Russia would go all in on one side. But at the same time, they have been a lot more vocal than anybody else and attempting to create some form of peace in the area.
One more question for you, Solomon. If it were not for the protests, do you think we would even see as much pushback as we're hearing right now?
I think the protests have been huge. I think that if you look at it, the people have spoken out, and I do believe in the power of the people, because protest is important. Protest is important for two reasons. One is, as you said, as I said, to basically vocalize your disdain for what's happening in terms of what the people in power are doing. So you saw that in various other things, people protest against Iraq. And the second thing is, protests are important because it gives people an outlet to basically give up, to basically direct their frustration in a certain manner. And so anyone who's trying to ban protests, such as, for example, in the United Kingdom, it was Suella Braverman, that would have caused a huge uproar in the United Kingdom and could have caused a lot of anarchy. And it's a lack of understanding of how human behavior works. But not just the protests, also what's happened on X. On social media, but X and TikTok, but mainly X, have been one of the few free speech platforms. Now, I don't believe X is completely free speech. So, right. For example, if you look at my account, it is the 34th biggest account in the whole of Twitter and the second biggest political account. But if you look at my engagement, it's 100x compared to the Zionist accounts. And yet, if you look at my views, they're about 100x lower. So even though my account is the biggest, it could have been even bigger, but there is some kind of something going on there in terms of it. So if you compare my account to the Zionist account, there is some difference. And even then, I'm still the top 34th account. So there is not complete free speech. Also, on top of that, there have been people banned who hold the pro-Palestinian position, and yet people on the pro-Israeli position have had carte blanche to ask for genocide, and there's been no problems. And we've posted about many of those examples. But despite that, we're still on. Some of us are still on, and we're able to basically expose the lies. And some of the lies that we've exposed is the 40 beheaded babies. We exposed the Al Ahli Baptist Hospital bombing. We exposed the chemical attacks, fake news that they were trying to propagate. We've exposed the tunnel issues. We exposed the Apache helicopters bombing, and now we're continuously posting what's happened on October the 7th. And that's been allowed to happen on Twitter, and that has had a severe impact, because immediately after October the 7th, because I used to run the biggest Twitter spaces on Twitter. I was the host of it until this issue, and I was forced to basically leave it behind because I had the pro-Palestinian position. But basically on there, people were coming on, military experts from the United States as well as from Israel, who was literally saying we need to burn Gaza to the ground. We need to turn it into a parking lot because of this dramatization of what happened October the 7th, such as the 40 beheaded babies. And so these debunkings have been monumental. There's been hashtags that have significantly trended that have been monumental. And that caused the IDF to do Twitter spaces, the IDF to start posting on Twitter and Israel. So it shows the impact has been huge, and it has stopped them from being full on genocide mode. But still, they've committed an extreme genocide. They've killed 1% of the populace. Just imagine that. That's like the United States killing 3.5 million people. Imagine murdering 3.5 million people. That's the level of genocide that's occurred. So even though it has halted them to an extent, and I do believe it has, because I think they would have just bombed it and killed maybe hundreds of thousands, maybe even millions immediately. There is still a large number of people who have been murdered.
Well said. Sulaiman Ahmed, where can people find your work?
Right, people can mainly find me on Twitter. My handle's on there, which is Sheikh Sulaiman. I do post on there regularly, and they can find me on Rumble at the moment, although I'm probably going to move on to other platforms with the same. No, it's not. It's Sulaiman Unsilenced on Rumble, where we'll be doing interviews. We had a short break, but hopefully we should be back soon.
Awesome. Thank you so much for coming on.
I appreciate it. Thanks for having me.
All right, guys, that was Sulaiman Ahmed. Again, follow him on Twitter. That's where I've seen a lot of those videos from that you guys see me share on here in reference to this conflict. So definitely follow him. He does great work.